But first, after all the argy-bargy this week about 149 foreign criminals, 7 murderers, of course, 37 sex offenders, 72 violent offenders, that government ineptitude put them out into the community, 3 things now are clear. First, that the government was warned about this problem last June, August, September and October, ahead of a High Court decision that ordered the release of just one man, the child rapist known only as NZYQ. The government was without a plan B in case they lost the court case. They then panicked and released all 149 foreign criminals into our community. Now, the second thing that's clear is that any attempt by Labor, and they were at it again today, to try and blame this on the opposition, that somehow tough guy Peter Dutton was in fact too soft on illegal boat arrivals and that this was all his fault, well, that just won't wash. But the third and most worrying thing is that we, the Australian taxpayer, will be left stuck with just about all of these serious criminals who will end up spending the rest of their lives here in Australia, living at our expense in government-funded housing and on welfare. Now, this is the end result when governments lose control of our borders, and that was where the last Labor government failed so monumentally. And let's face it, it's also another example of government losing control of the welfare system so that unworthy people get to live off others. Almost all of these foreign criminals arrived illegally. Unlike the rest of us who have pulled our weight and paid taxes all of our working lives, these unsavoury individuals will now live in a country where the vast bulk of Australians don't want them, living off taxpayers who themselves are already struggling to make ends meet. Again, this is the kind of situation that angers the ordinary voter. But the Albanese government's response to all of this is just clever politics and not about better government. Last week, we had the Prime Minister strutting about in the House, crowing about how clever he'd been to break the solemn commitment he'd made over 100 times on those stage 3 tax cuts. This week, that cocky strut from the PM had all but vanished, as he'd had to confront another week of damning headlines showing just how incompetent his ministers are and how still, underneath it all, Labor doesn't believe in border protection. Labor is soft on illegal arrivals and, to be honest, doesn't have the ticker to make the difficult decisions you've got to make to keep Australians safe. Now, it's a mess, but it's a mess of the government's own making. And even when they do promise stuff in an attempt to mop up their mistakes, they can't even get that right. Here are promises made last year to protect the Australian victims of these foreign criminals now living amongst us from their justifiable fears of revenge attacks and retribution.
I just want to cover off one more matter, which is about victim support. When we were last here in Canberra, the Deputy Prime Minister made a commitment that the Commonwealth would make best efforts to contact victims. We have actually gone beyond that. We have established a program called Victim Link, which is within the Department of Home Affairs.
Here too is Labor's Richard Marles, who at the time when all this broke was the acting Prime Minister.
We will make our best efforts to communicate with the families of victims around not only the circumstances of the release, but the steps that the government is now taking in accordance with the legislation as amended that is passed this parliament. We will do our best efforts in relation to that.
Well, that was last year. Today we learn that so many of these victims have not even now been contacted.
Earlier today I spoke to Andrew, a member of the family whose mother Svetlana was brutally murdered by Tony Kalisar, one of the 149 criminals the minister released. He is disgusted that despite the minister's undertakings, no one has contacted the family. They fear the murderer turning up at their home. Why hasn't this family been contacted as the Minister and Deputy Prime Minister promised?
The government is committed to ensuring that all victims and their families are supported, noting, of course, the privacy restrictions and the fact that the vast majority of these victims are, of course, victims of breaches of state and territory laws, not Commonwealth laws. And that is why
Order.
That is why this is a very serious issue. And
Order.
that is why
The member Groom and the member
that is
Bowman.
why the Department of Home Affairs Victim Link Service was set up to coordinate contact from victims and their families to ensure that they are connected to law enforcement and essential support services in their state or territory so that they can feel safe and supported.
Well, the first point is, it doesn't matter whether they're state or federal laws that these foreign criminals have breached. They're only out in the streets because that man let them out. And there he was in the Parliament today saying that if you want to be contacted, then you, the victim, have to contact us. And even this, if you can believe it.
In terms of that family, I've spoken a little bit about the victim link approach, but if the Leader of the Opposition has the relevant contact details, I'll be very pleased to speak with any affected family members immediately after question time.
Now, I thought I'd seen it all, but that's about as inept as it gets. I wish they'd just swear Peter Dutton into the portfolio and get on with it. But this is sadly symptomatic not just of a country adrift, but a government that's completely out of its depth.